is brought to you by
APQS, handcrafted quilting machines. Aurifil. Aurifil Italian thread, perfectly suited for all your quilting projects. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing.
Havels Sewing. When you need to cut it close, choose Havels.
Moda. Make something quilty with Moda fabrics.
Welcome to Quilty.
Nicely done.
Mary, I love stopping by Quilty.
You know, we love it when you're here, Mom. And for all of those of you who don't know, this is my mom. It's Mary Ann Fons, and you are kind of a quilting legend.
I'm a long-time quilter.
It's true.
I've been quilting since I was younger than you.
Seasoned.
Yes, I'm seasoned.
Cumin and dill, I don't know.
Cinnamon.
Yeah, cinnamon, yeah. So, Mom, we are going to talk about color today. We're going to talk about gradation. And there's different ways to say it. I was like, is it gradation or gradation?
Or graduation.
Graduation.
It just means something that's changing as it moves along.
Exactly. Like graduating from college. First you start out as a freshman and you're stupid, and then you're brilliant by the end.
I didn't look it up in a dictionary or anything, but I would say, you know, it means something that's gradually changing.
And we'll put the definition. World speak.
Vocab.
Yes. So we'll put the definition up on the screen. But on the quilt behind us, you can see a really good example of this. So this is hung to the side. This is Megan Bohr's quilt called Watershed, and it's featured in Quilty magazine. And it's a really good example of what we're talking about, graduated color. And you can see that it goes from light down to dark. And the effect that you get is one that is really, I love graduated color. I think it's so, the eye has somewhere to go in this very natural, pleasing way. It's a very smooth kind of thing. It's cool.
And I should sort of pop in here and say, in a way, we've got graduating color. Color is hue, you know, the actual color. Yeah. And there's also graduating value, which is dark and light. Absolutely. And so some quilts only get involved in the value part. Some only graduate color-wise.
Sure.
But sometimes all that's going together, and you don't really have to think about all that stuff. You don't necessarily do when you're making a quilt, but these are just elements to keep in mind to kind of analyze other quilts that you might like, or think about how they work when you're planning a quilt. I know that when there is no contrast, either in color or in value, you can't see a pattern.
It seems it's very blended. If you see a very, very low contrast quilt that maybe uses all fabrics from one specific fabric line that's very like, picture like a shabby sheet quilt that's lots of pinks and whites and blues.
And you might want that.
Absolutely. But if you don't, you know, it's just really kind of a lesson in contrast. Yes. Do you want to graduate the color? Do you want to graduate the value, or do you not? You know, a black and white quilt has no graduation. It's just like high contrast, black
super
or
high
white.
Contrast. And I've always gone for quite a bit of contrast in my quilts because from the beginning, I was trying to make a living as a quilter, and I was wanting quilts to be published. And so I wanted them to show up really well in photography because I wanted people to want to make those quilts. And so I've never done real much low contrast, but I admire it.
Absolutely, and quilters have made careers out of doing just
Absolutely.
that. So today I'd like to take these strips. I've cut a number of blue strips, and we're going to graduate them. We're going to go through this pile and just go from light to dark and kind of see how that process works, because sometimes, well, pretty much all the time, you're going to have to audition these fabrics to see what order they really work best in.
And you really want to look at them.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if this is, should we put the lightest to the front?
Absolutely, yes, let's put the lightest to the front. Okay, so I'm just going to sort of separate between what I can just see. I mean, obviously, that's a little lighter. This is sort of a medium. You just kind of toss things around, and then from there, you arrange. So I'm not sure if that's dark
Let's
or
do
light.
something like really wrong.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's a good way to illustrate it. And you know, too, another thing, I mean, we're talking about contrast, and we're talking about reading fabric, and I think that's something that beginners have a really hard time with because, you know, this strip, for example, I'm going to show this one out sort of on my arm to kind of isolate it from the rest. There's a lot of red in this, you know? I mean, it's almost a half and half situation. And does this fabric read blue, or does it read red? Does it read gold? It's kind of a tough one. I think it'll still work, but sometimes if you're working as a beginner trying to read fabric, be careful of these prints that are sort of half and half, both, because they don't necessarily read one or the other, and you can be really confused. Like you
might want to reject it.
You might want. You might get rid of it.
Here's another great example. This is very high contrast because it's I would call it dark, but there's a lot of white on it. So there's only two colors, and they're very high in contrast.
Right. It's true.
So that's harder.
That's harder.
So I think we've got a pretty good, you know, like this one may be the lightest. I don't know. What do you think? That one's the lightest?
I think this is the lightest.
Okay. And something I'll tell you. This is a family story. you know, your grandpa, my dad, was a really talented artist. He was. My father was a commercial exhibit designer and watercolors, and he would. He would. Say half squint your eyes and look at something through your eyelashes to decide how the color was. And I thought that was just a James Graham thing, but it turns out that it's a common practice for artists.
Right, because you know whenever you see a quilter or anybody going like that, it means they're trying to read the color.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So I would go, I think, this way. And you know, and the thing is, there's, I would want to caution people. There's not like just a perfect way to do this because the fabrics are gonna all. How am I doing here?
You're doing great. And I think also it's important to point out, I think I'm gonna put this one before that one. I think it's also important to point out that the more colors you have, the less every single individual one will matter. Right. If you only have 3 strips, it's like, well, white, light, medium, dark. But if you have 25 strips, there's a lot more sort of leeway.
I think of the fabrics, especially in a scrap quilt, which of course you can't make a scrap quilt unless you have lots and lots of fabric. But it's like it's like looking at a crowd of people. If there's a crowd of people, it's hard to pick out one person in that crowd of people. Whereas if there's just 5 people, like 5 fabrics, every person really shows up. So it's another kind of metaphorical way to think about it.
That's great. You're good with the
so
analogies.
I'm squinting. Well, you know,
I think we're about there because this one just is darker to me in my eye than that one. And you know, if I had my big stash of blue scraps, I'd probably try to get another one in here about, like, you know what I mean? I kind of feel like, this middle part, because the light blues I think are reading really well, graduating very slowly, very nicely.
And this is just like a fast grab from your stash.
Absolutely.
And you know, you might start a quilt like it's Megan's quilt, right? From your stash grab, but then you might want to go out and shop for some specific fabrics, paste a little swatch of the ones you really like on a folder or something. I suppose your generation would photograph them and
maybe
use Pinterest. But you know, I like to feel the fabric too. So you might want to go shopping to fill in something that's missing.
Absolutely. So you can go with your little checklist. Okay, cool. I hope that gave you a little bit of instruction on graduating fabrics, reading color, reading pattern a little bit. There's so much to learn, and the best way to learn is to practice. So, you know, try a little baby quilt that's all graduated pinks.
It would be great.
It would be great, yeah. Or, you know, graduated, you know, greens.
And easy, straight seams, nothing to, you know, no triangles. You know, do it in a day.
Yeah. Good job, Mom.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on the show. You want to close the show because you opened it.
Okay, bye everybody. See you next time on Quilty.
Tell them to look on Facebook and Twitter.
Okay, look on Facebook and Twitter.
Do you know what that is? Do you know what Twitter is?
I certainly do.
Just kidding. Bye.
Quilty is brought to you by
APQS, handcrafted quilting machines. Aurifil Italian thread, perfectly suited for all your quilting projects. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing.
Havel's Sewing. When you need to cut it close, choose Havel's.
Moda, make something quilty with Moda fabrics.